demographic transition, climate change, digital transition. Three major transitions affecting Vietnam, impacting children in different ways. Can be positive, also negative. When your core business actually impacts children, then that triggers your social responsibility. We often think it's actually the responsibility of the government. But the private sector has so much to contribute in terms of innovation.
How can the private sector join hands with UNICEF to solve the problems for our children? Hello, welcome back to the Quoc Khanh Show podcast on With Success. I'm Quoc Khanh, your host, and joining me today, it's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Ani Saguisag, the Chief of Social Policy and Governance at UNICEF Vietnam, and we're going to have conversations on how to support the children in Vietnam, especially on the time of celebration of 50 years anniversary of UNICEF in Vietnam. So Ani, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, it's good to have you on the show, and we want to talk about how we can support the children in Vietnam. But first of all, tell me about what you do at UNICEF. You are Chief of Social Policy and Governance. It sounds really important to me.
The section actually looks at broad policies affecting children. So we work on public finance for children,
Right.
meaning programs are not going to be executed for children as if you don't have the money, if you don't
right.
have the investments in
Right.
it. It's similar to
Sure.
private sector in business, right? We work on engaging with the government to ensure that the policies, the plans, the budgets of the government are actually responding to the needs of children. In UNICEF, we have program sectors like education, health, child protection, water, sanitation and hygiene, nutrition, and everyone knows about it, right? About children. But social policy is basically your foundation, because all of these programs on health, nutrition, education, water, and sanitation will not succeed unless you have the right budgets, unless they're reaching the right beneficiaries, unless they are properly monitored and measured to demonstrate that they are actually achieving results. So social policy, in a sense, provides that kind of glue across the UNICEF programs.
And so money is a very important
Yes.
part of that. The
And
finance
making sure
part.
that determining how the money is actually spent.
Right.
So the monitoring as well, the planning. Yeah.
It's really important to me. So UNICEF Vietnam is celebrating the 50th anniversary in this country. Wow, quite a journey. I know you've only been here for a few years, but if you can just give us just a broad overview of those 50 years based on whatever UNICEF already have so far. What are some of the biggest achievements that you guys have done already if you look to celebrate the 50th anniversary in Vietnam? Half of the century.
Yes, exactly. 50, right? It's like the golden anniversary. So if you go back to the history of UNICEF, we came after the Second World War. UNICEF was actually established in 1946 globally. We came into Vietnam in 1975. And if you look at the whole history of UNICEF globally, we were primarily established after the Second World War to really look at how can we help children recover from the ravages of war. And that was similar. When we came to Vietnam, Vietnam was just recovering from the war and then the reunification. And we were the first UN agency to actually establish an office. And it really, our mission was really to look at the situation of children, to help all children. Okay? And it looked at basic survival needs, making sure that there's food, there's clean water, There's protection from violence, abuse, exploitation, education. So we started really in trying to address the basic needs of children. And over the years, again, you see Vietnam recovering, moving to a more, let's say, developing country. And the program also evolved. So beyond the providing the basic services, the direct services. I mean, if you talk to the older generation, they will remember UNICEF putting up the hand pumps in their communities to give them water. Gone are those days. So eventually, the government was able to do it. So we also evolved. The program then started to look more at how do we help government to do what they are supposed to be doing. We're not there to replace the government and actually do the service delivery, but we're there to help and handhold, help them understand what's the quality of the services that need to be there, help them to plan that every child needs to be reached by all of these services. So one example, I think that we go back in history, when UNICEF came in, again, one of the key issues was about health. Okay? Children were dying from preventable diseases, polio, tetanus. One of the major milestones, I think, that UNICEF really helped with the government is to establish the expanded immunization program. And the immunization rates actually has improved a lot over the years. And this has really reduced child deaths. So access to clean water also. This is something that UNICEF also has been working on for the past 50 years. And if you look at how we're programming, we've changed the way we program because we are still working with the government to improve access to clean water. But it's now also about the quality. It's about making sure that the water is not just accessible or that everyone has it, but it's actually clean and can be consumed and can be, again, made available for everyone. So it's evolving. The 50 years shows that we started out as humanitarian, doing service delivery, because then the government didn't have capacity at that time. But now, you see, Vietnam is actually a star. Vietnam has really demonstrated that they are now capable of delivering a lot of these services, these basic services for children. It's not yet perfect, but so much has changed since over the past 50 years.
Yeah, I believe so. Quite a journey, 50 years. I believe there's so much that you have done for this country, UNICEF have done for this country. But at this time, if you're looking forward, what are the work that need to be done? I mean, critical issues that still require attention, and you look forward to achieve that.
I think what we're now looking at is actually 3 major transitions affecting Vietnam, and maybe I would say also the world. Okay, and I hear this often when we engage with our government counterparts, that Vietnam is going through a demographic transition, meaning Vietnam is becoming an aged population very fast, meaning the birth rate is dropping.
Older, yeah.
Right? Birth rate is dropping. You're having less children and you're having more elderly. The second is climate change. Okay? And you feel this. I mean, the last week, the flooding was really bad. Last year, Yagi was really bad. And you will see this and this is essentially the new normal that we are really facing now. Okay. The third transition is actually the digital transition. AI.
Yep. Everybody talk about it.
There's no way for us to escape. And these transitions are actually impacting children in different ways. So they can be positive, but there are also negative impacts. So one example, for example, the demographic shift. We're saying that with the aging population and with the reduction in fertility, you will have a heavier burden for the younger generation to take care
of the
older population. And what does that mean? You need children and young people who will be healthier, who will have to be smarter, who have to be resilient to be able to sustain your workforce. Okay? You need children who can actually cope with the digital transition. They need digital skills. They need the green skills as well to be able to work in renewable energies, to be able to work in a world that is now facing a lot of environmental degradation. So the changes that we see are going to impact children in different ways, in more severe ways, in longer, it will be a longer stay for them. So we see that education is still important. Health is still important. Access to safe and clean drinking water. These are basic rights of children. But the context has changed so much. And how we respond to those contexts, I think, is what we need to be innovative with. We need to start recognizing that education 50 years ago, or 20 or 30 years ago, will not be the same in the next 50 years. One example that we often hear is, how will AI actually impact the way that classrooms or teachers are actually teaching?
Right. That's affecting our children a lot.
Exactly. So climate change. How will we ensure that health services are actually meeting these climate realities? One example is the increase in waterborne diseases. With the changing patterns of climate, you will see vector-borne diseases or diseases coming from mosquitoes, these kinds of increasing. Okay? And with the climate patterns changing now, you have more rainfall coming in the past years, longer. And this can actually increase incidence of dengue. It can increase incidence of these type of illnesses. So how do we then anticipate? How do we then plan? So we're still talking about the same sectors, same programs, but how do you deliver it differently to meet all of these challenges?
The question is how then? What is the solution then?
Well, we don't have all the answers. We're still, I think, no, but seriously, right? What UNICEF is trying to do right now is to also understand these transitions with the government, because these transitions are happening now, right? We're going through it. Climate change is real, and it's happening faster than we thought it would, right? And the beautiful thing, I think, for me, is that there's a lot more awareness that it's happening, and there's a lot more interest to do something. What that thing is, I think people still need to understand what can be done. For us in UNICEF, one of the things that we are really advocating for is, for example, climate smart social services. So we know that health centers will be affected by all of these typhoons. Right now, we're hearing that there are health centers that have been inundated and have lost power, have lost all of their medical supplies because of the emergency. Right? How do we ensure that they can actually, in the next typhoon, again, it will happen. In the next typhoon, how do we ensure that they don't lose the ability to deliver those services again for children? How do we make sure that they are trying to use renewable energy? Okay. How do we ensure that the access to clean water when when the health centers are inundated is still there? Otherwise, they won't be able to deliver the services. So it's figuring out those problems. And to me, I think this is a good entry of where innovation and the private sector really can come in.
Right.
Right? Because a lot of these services we often think is actually, it's essentially the responsibility of the government. These are basic services. But the private sector has so much to contribute in terms of innovation. Renewable energy, access to, technology, access to tech. Private sector has this ability to test and innovate in a more timely manner. I think. Private sector, I've seen, has a higher appetite for risk-taking and testing and modeling. Because then, if you don't innovate in the private sector, you also lose your market. Right? So to me, this is how I guess we can try to address these problems, these transitions. And it's about partnerships. I think we rely a lot on government to deliver all of these services. But government can really benefit from partnerships. And that's why we hear about the public-private partnerships.
Right.
Businesses sell their products. Sometimes the consumers are children or the parents of the children. Private sector impacts children both directly and indirectly. When your core business actually impacts children, then that triggers your social responsibility.
Could you elaborate on the partnership with business and corporate and the private sector? I mean, how can the private sector join hands with UNICEF to solve the problems for our children?
I love your question. And let's say emotional way. Why should the private sector care for children? Okay. When business operations don't happen in a vacuum, right? It happens in a community. Businesses sell their products. Sometimes the consumers are children or the parents of the children. Private sector provides services. And again, these are also accessed by children, accessed by communities. So private sector impacts children both directly and indirectly. And one of the things that we always talk about is that when your core business actually impacts children, then that triggers your social responsibility. In the private sector, we talk about environmental, social, and governance safeguards.
ESG, right?
ESG.
Yeah.
And when we talk to the private sector, they always think about what are the environmental safeguards that they need to put in place so that their business can become sustainable. They sometimes struggle with the S, with the social impact. And that's where we think child rights really comes in. How does your business impact the lives of children? Now, one example I would say, because I work in social policy, we work a lot on social assistance or social protection, cash transfers, trying to reach those who are poor and marginalized so that then they have the money to be able to spend for social services. Okay? Now, how can private sector provide more inclusive financial instruments so that the poor can actually be financially included? Okay? And in some countries, it's digital wallets. Once you have these digital wallets, it actually helps you to transact. It helps you to access these services. But what we're seeing is that these digital wallets are only available or largely available in the urban areas. So what about the poor in the rural areas? And who can provide them access? It's oftentimes, again, the private sector, because it's the private sector that actually provides these digital services. So there are different ways that the private sector can help. And I think it's also about assessing how your business is actually impacting children, whether directly or indirectly. Another example, I think here, and is very relevant to Vietnam, is actually the travel and tourism industry. Right? I think a week ago, I read an article where, again, the influx of tourism here in Vietnam has really been increasing. And the government is really aiming for higher targets or attracting more tourists to come in. It's good for the economy because then it stimulates, again, income, revenue in the tourism and travel and tourism industry. But it can also bring certain risks for children. So in some countries, this can result in child labor. Sometimes children drop out of school and then again start to sell products to tourists. So it's now then the responsibility of the travel and tourism industry to assess, are they again being used in a way? Is there tourism infrastructure also being used to negatively impact children? So there are different ways that other countries have dealt with it. In one instance, one country that I've worked in the Philippines, they actually adopted a code of conduct for tourists, where tourists are asked not to buy products from children who are selling or give when children are begging, so that then you discourage. At the same time, the tourism industry started to give access to internships or formal on-the-job training for young people who want to get into the formal tourism industry. So there are different ways that the private sector actually is somehow impacting child rights, and it's about assessing what those impacts are and then finding what are the measures that can be taken.
What makes it difficult for UNICEF to call out for support from the private sector? I mean, what are some of the reasons that the private sector, the businesses, the corporates, they are kind of reluctant to join? Or, yeah.
I think sometimes it's also a lack of understanding of what their social impact actually is on children. Right?
They don't know what they're getting to.
Or they don't think that it's part of their responsibility. Right? So, private sector, we've heard them talk about corporate social responsibility, CSR, right? But when you look at the CSR programs that they have, it's often charity-based or philanthropy, where they think that making donations is enough to address some social impacts. And it's true that it can make a big difference. We call it strategic social investments. Okay? If private sector can continue giving to charities and, again, philanthropic giving, that's very important. But we should go beyond. Right? And the problem is, I think the private sector doesn't really know how to go beyond, let's say, the donations. They don't really look at their full operations or their core business or even their supply chains, how it actually impacts children. One example that we have a study on the coffee industry here in Vietnam. Okay? And it's big. Coffee is really big. One of the biggest products that Vietnam actually exports, right? But what we also found is that child labor actually continues to exist in the coffee industry.
Really?
But it's in the lower tier of the supply chain at the end. So, again, we often look at the big multinationals, the companies, the registered companies, and say that, do you have child labor? Of course they don't, right? But it's when they are outsourced, and
their
oftentimes,
partners, their suppliers.
Exactly, that the child labor still continues to exist. And sometimes that's I think the challenge for the private sector. To what extent can you really take responsibility? Are they brave enough to really look at their core business and really assess, do you really have, what is the social impact that you have on children, on women, on families, on the elderly.
So far in Vietnam, the partnership with the private sector, what is the biggest achievement so far in terms of this partnership?
Very interesting. There's one partnership that I'm actually truly very proud of, and we've been working on it as part of our child rights and business portfolio. And this is a program that we call promoting family-friendly policies in the workplace. Okay? And why should it matter? Why should businesses care about family-friendly policies? Because a lot of the businesses are actually employing parents.
Right.
Right? And I say this with also as a parent. Okay.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. I have 5 kids. And you can just imagine how balancing your responsibilities and parenting and actually showing up to work
That's a lot.
can really be a
Yeah.
lot, right? And for me, what I really appreciate about UNICEF, or where my workplace is that we have really good family-friendly policies. Meaning we have flexible work arrangements. If I need to bring my son to the clinic, UNICEF gives me that flexibility. When I was pregnant with my youngest son,
Yeah.
I was entitled to 6 months paid maternity leave. Okay. Those kind of policies actually created an environment where I feel that I'm respected as a mother. And to me, I'm in a happy workplace. And when you're in a happy workplace, you can actually deliver better.
Because you're happy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So keeping employees happy is actually a good investment for businesses. When you have maybe 50 or 60 or 70% of your employees as parents, it makes a lot of sense for business to
Right.
really invest in family-friendly policies. So we've been working with a number of companies, I think more than 200 already, to educate them about the importance of family-friendly policies like paid parental leaves, flexible work arrangements, support to childcare. The extra program that we also bring this in is actually doing parenting in the workplace. And we just signed actually an agreement, a partnership agreement with Deep Sea Industrial Zones in Haiphong. And we're really excited about this program because then we are going to partner with them to reach their clients in the industrial
Right.
zones to actually roll out parenting programs that focus on helping parents to understand how to parent 0 to 8-year-old children. And these are also stressful times, especially for parents, right? Children don't come with a manual. And oftentimes we hear that as a parent of 5 kids, every child was different, right?
Sure.
Raising your children can be a different experience across. And then I didn't know how to do it. I learned
Yeah.
along the way. So if there's a way for you to actually help parents gain these skills, and to me, that's the exciting part. When we signed the agreement, Deep Sea said that, actually, some of our employees come in so stressed because, again, of stress in taking care of
Totally
their
understand
children.
that. Yeah.
And it spills over into the workplace, right?
You are such a super mom raising 5 kids and still working for the children.
Oh, no. I mean, that inspires me.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
when I
is-
started my work in UNICEF,
Yeah.
I already had 5 kids. It was both a personal commitment because then I was thinking about what kind of world would I want my children to be living in.
So family and friends policy is a successful partnership project between UNICEF and the private sector.
Yes.
What about some of this the project that you still need support from the private sector and you are calling out for help? Maybe in the future, maybe now, but what are some of the project that you've been working on that you really need the help and the support from businesses and the private sector?
And I really want to emphasize is that education.
Education, how?
Education is still such a very important
How could
thing
private
here
sector help with that?
How can private sector needs to look at one of the let's say it's not just education, the education system, because when you have kids or children in the education system, they need to transition to employment. Right? The reason why a lot of us send our kids to school is to prepare them eventually to enter into the workforce. One of the things that we've looked at globally, and it's not just in Vietnam, is that there are still actually barriers that children face from their transition from education to getting into the workforce. And it's because sometimes private sector doesn't give them the opportunities to actually enter into the workforce and to bring the skills that they actually have. There's a mismatch between the skills that are taught in school and what the private sector needs. What we want the private sector to do is actually to work with the schools to tell the schools what kind of skill set do we need from the young people so that they can actually enter into the workforce? Because we have education systems, we have the systems in place, but are they actually being trained for the job market? And the schools may not be really fully aligned or fully understanding what the job market is, but the private sector knows what they want. What are the skills? What are the jobs that they need? So what are the jobs that that are available in renewable energy? Okay. What are the skills that they would need from these young people? And we want the private sector to be more candid, be more vocal, be ready to engage with the private sector, with the schools.
Yeah. They could partner with schools. They could, join in.
And it's providing the knowledge, giving the schools the right information so that the schools can actually plan their curriculum better. At the same time, we're hoping that the private sector will give opportunities for internships, apprenticeships, because young people also need the experience.
Sure.
Right? And this is one of the barriers that we hear from young people. Yeah? They say that, when we get in, we don't know what we are doing, and we lose our jobs because we're lost. Yeah? And they have to job hunt or job hop from one job to another because they're not really prepared. So can private sector also provide these kind of internships, apprenticeships to get these young people ready to enter into the workforce until they are really mature enough to actually,
Well, that's been a problem for the society, not just for UNICEF, but a big problem for the society where you try to close the gap between school and the reality, school and the real working environment. And people talk a lot about joining hands between school and the businesses, but there seems to be a lot of work need to be done. So UNICEF could be a supporter on that too.
Absolutely.
You guys can connect.
Yes. I think one of the things that UNICEF can do is actually convene and bring partners together.
You bring partners together, like the private sector and from school.
Yes. Another partner that we think should also be given a seat in the table, and it's a very important seat, is actually children and young people. Because we believe that, again, children and young people have the right to participate and to also contribute what they think can really address the problems.
We need to hear from their voices.
Exactly. And UNICEF has that convening power, that we have networks of young people who can work with the private sector, who can work with the public sector, and we sit down together and find solutions jointly. The private sector is such a powerful force. There's so much potential for good that can be contributed for child rights. UNICEF wants to invite the private sector, really look at how they can contribute. But aside from that, it's also inviting to look at how you operate your business. What is the social impact?
Is that true that this is what I've heard? You can correct me if I'm wrong, but are you working with the National Assembly of Vietnam to discuss some new policies for the children? Is that true, or how does that work?
UNICEF works with the National Assembly to provide new research or new knowledge, right? We work with them oftentimes through invitation. We're invited actually during conferences to provide new knowledge about certain laws that
Right.
will be discussed. Now, one example I think that we have been raising already with the National Assembly is the need to revisit the age of the child. The law on children now defines children as 16 years old, but the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, by the way, Vietnam signed in 1990, and I think Vietnam should be proud of this. That Vietnam is actually the first country in the region to sign the Convention on the Rights of the Child in
Interesting.
1990. So 35 years
Right.
of becoming a state party. And the convention actually says that the children are persons below the age of 18. But currently the law is actually, the law on children defines children as persons 16
16.
and below. So this age group of 17 to below 18
Yeah.
are missing out on all of the rights that every child should actually
Really?
have.
So 17 and 18.
Yes. So that's something that we have been discussing with the National Assembly, because we said that, again, all children should be entitled,
Yeah.
should be entitled to all of their rights.
Should not be left behind.
Exactly, no child left behind. By not aligning with the international definition of who is a child, you still see these children being left behind.
Wow. So for now, if you could share anything with the audience who are the businessmen, entrepreneurs, someone representing the private sectors, what are some of the key messages that you want to tell them to inspire them to join hands with UNICEF?
I think the private sector is such a powerful force. You know, there's so much potential for good that can be contributed for child rights, and UNICEF wants to invite the private sector really look at how they can contribute, whether it's through strategic social investments. It could be financial contributions. Okay? But aside from that, it's also inviting the private sector to look at your overall core business, your supply chain, how you operate your business, and really look at what is the social impact that you have on children, on women, on mothers, on fathers, on communities, and seriously think about how can we really improve their lives. Yeah. Businesses impact all, let's say, all persons, right? Whether you're children, you're adults, in so many different ways. But what we want the businesses to really do is to look at how they can contribute to improving healthcare. How can businesses contribute to improving access and quality of education? How can businesses improve financial literacy or financial inclusion of the poorest of the poor? So it's really about inviting business to start innovating and be more creative and be more thoughtful in how they impact children. And UNICEF is really open to having that conversation.
Wonderful. I mean, what does it take to build a successful partnership between the private sectors and UNICEF based on the experiences you have so far? If somebody want to join you from now, then what are some of the lessons they could learn from the past in order to make create a successful partnership and really bring out the outcomes?
I think it's really about shared values. The way for us to become successful is if we come together to find what is the common good that we want to do for children. If your business is in, for example, let's say, in the business of digital transformation, yeah, we know that schools can benefit from digital transformation. We know that health centers can actually benefit from digital transformation, digital services. Can we partner with you, starting with assessing how you can improve these services for children? So it's about recognizing that we want to address a common issue affecting children, and then making sure that you bring in your technical expertise, your core business, and we bring our expertise on children. And let's have that conversation, that honest conversation where we can really be partners, where you invest, and we come together and see how those investments will actually, again, grow in the future.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of entrepreneurs were out there, they have a good heart, they want to contribute, they really want to join. And of course, at the beginnings, everybody have shares value. But what could go wrong? That's something we should avoid in order to make this partnership more effective.
From UNICEF, really, we see that the private sector also can provide investments for children.
Right.
Funding is also constrained globally,
Yep.
going into social development.
Yep.
We are, UNICEF is actually also receiving some financial contributions from the private sector. We have to be very clear that we also do not accept financial contributions from any of the private sector.
Right.
There are also some sectors where we will say no because your values or your products or your services actually can cause harm to
Good to
children.
know.
And we will not compromise on that. We have red lines also. There are certain industries where we say that we will not work with you and we will not accept any financial contributions. But at the same time, what we do say is that we will engage with you strategically to show you why you should stop doing what you're doing. For example, if we know that certain industries actually employ children, child labor,
Yep.
we will not accept your money. We will not, but we will engage you and try to convince you to revisit and look at your supply chain and then stop child labor from happening.
Right.
So it's about strategic engagements. We're not going to name industries in particular and say that all of them are all blacklisted and we're not going to work with you. But what we are saying is that there are certain companies that we've already done due diligence. We actually do we look at the background of all of these companies and say that there are certain practices in this company that that are really red lines and we cannot partner.
Yeah, very clear. Beside the education project that you mentioned before, any critical issue right now that you really need to solve for the children in Vietnam that could get support from the private sector?
Aside from education, actually, I could say definitely child protection. One of the what has emerged already is actually online child protection. Right? A lot of our children actually spend a lot of time in cyberspace. I mean, I can tell you, my son spends more time on his mobile phone,
My
on his
teenager girls as well.
exactly,
Yeah.
and on their gadgets, and in some instances they can actually suffer harm, whether it's bullying or exposure
This
to
happened.
exactly exposure to inappropriate content, and to me, that's where private sector can really come in, because the infrastructure of all of this access to the virtual world is really run by the private sector. And one of the things that we in UNICEF have been trying to promote is actually online safety. But we can't do it without the full engagement and full participation and willingness of the private sector to come in.
So all the activities relating to the partnership with UNICEF would go under either CSR activity for the company or the factor social and the ESG program. Is that true?
Yeah, you can classify it, I guess, in
Something
that
like that,
way.
right?
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. Because one of the ways of looking at child rights is also looking at assessing your environmental impact, your social impact, so the ESG. We think it's not just about providing donations or providing financial contributions, but it's also about how you can actually operate your business in a sustainable way.
Right.
Yeah. So we really encourage businesses to look at ESG and to maybe to understand better how child rights is actually related to your ESG standards or monitoring. Now, on CSR, corporate social responsibility, more and more companies are actually going beyond the financial contributions. Financial contributions to communities, to even to UNICEF are very, very welcome from the private sector. We need all the help that we can get. And what we're seeing is that we hope these financial contributions are not just one-off contributions, because change or social change takes time.
Right.
It's similar to, again, with businesses, right? When
Yeah.
you invest, the earlier you invest and the longer you invest,
Right.
higher the rates of
The
return.
return.
And that's essentially
longer
it. When
time.
you talk about child rights, it's not just a one-off contribution, but we're really looking at how can we be in this long marathon together. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Yeah. It's for the future of the children, so it's always going to be long term.
Yes,
And it's a lot of a thing that the private sector can contribute to this project and the partnership with UNICEF Vietnam. So there's a lot of work to be done.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're really, really keen to engage with the private sector. So different ways, so
All right.
many different opportunities, whether it's a financial contribution, whether it's technical assistance. Bring in your core business so that then it can bring about positive results for children.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, and good luck with that journey. And congratulations on the 50th anniversary of UNICEF in Vietnam. Thank you, UNICEF, for what you guys have done in the country so far. And we hope that more and more businesses and the private sector's representative going to join hands with UNICEF in order to get more work done in Vietnam for the future of our children.
Looking forward to the next 50 years.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you.
you.
Thank you. That's the story of Ms. Ani Saguisag, the Chief of Social Policy and Governance at UNICEF Vietnam. And as she mentioned, there's a lot of work that need help and support from the private sectors. So whoever listening to this podcast, especially entrepreneurs and businessmen and people from the private sector, you're welcome to join UNICEF Vietnam. There's a lot of work to be done for our children for the next 50 years for UNICEF in Vietnam. So thank you so much for listening. And you can always check it out, the podcast on different platforms such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And please subscribe to our Vid Success YouTube channel for the upcoming videos of many shows that we have on the channel so far. And we have the links on the description below that you can join us with the group chat to exchange conversations with our audience and get a newsletter every week, come out every Thursday for the highlight and interesting stories from our channel. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.